The cardboard box tumbled down the concrete steps of Sunset Manor, spilling its contents across the sidewalk like discarded memories. Harold Chen, 83 years old and weighing barely 120 pounds, watched helplessly as his entire life scattered in the morning wind-faded photographs, yellowed letters, and a small wooden box that cracked open to reveal something that made a passing jogger stop dead in her tracks. "Oh my God," whispered Sarah Martinez, a local nurse heading to her shift at the hospital. She knelt down and carefully picked up the tarnished bronze medal, reading the inscription with growing amazement. "Silver Star, Korean War, Harold Chen." Harold shuffled toward her, his weathered hands shaking as he reached for the medal. "Please, miss, that's all I have left." Behind him, the automated doors of Sunset Manor slid open with a mechanical hiss. Margaret Petroff, the facility's administrator, emerged with a clipboard and a maintenance worker. "Mr. Chen, you need to collect your belongings and vacate the premises immediately," Margaret said, her voice carrying the cold efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Your account is 3 months overdue. We've been more than patient." Harold's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the scattered remnants of his life. "I told you, my Social Security check was delayed. The VA said there was a problem with my records. I just need a few more days." "You've had 3 months of few more days," Margaret replied. "This is a business, not a charity. We have other residents waiting for your room." Sarah stood up, still holding the silver star. "Ma'am, do you realize what this is? This man is a war hero." Margaret barely glanced at the medal. "Miss, I don't know who you are, but this is private property, and a private matter. Mr. Chen has been given ample notice." A small crowd had begun to gather. Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner market, Tom the mailman, and several other neighbors watched as Harold knelt on the sidewalk, trying to gather his scattered belongings with trembling hands. "I fought in Korea," Harold said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Chosin Reservoir. I was 19 years old." Sarah knelt beside him, helping to collect the photographs. One showed a young Asian American soldier in dress uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons. Another showed the same soldier with his arm around a pretty woman in a wedding dress. "Who is this?" Sarah asked gently. "My wife, Eleanor. She died 2 years ago, cancer." Harold's voice broke. "We never had children. I thought I'd saved enough for my final years, but the medical bills." Tom, the mailman, stepped forward. "Harold, I've been delivering mail to this neighborhood for 20 years. I know you. You're the guy who always tips at Christmas, who helps Mrs. Patterson with her groceries." "Doesn't matter," Margaret said impatiently. "Sentiment doesn't pay the bills. Mr. Chen, you have until noon to remove your belongings, or they'll be disposed of." She turned and walked back into the building, leaving Harold surrounded by strangers who were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Sarah pulled out her phone. "I'm calling someone. This isn't right." "Who are you calling?" Tom asked. "My brother. He's a reporter for Channel 8. 20 minutes later, David Martinez arrived with a cameraman. He was a serious-looking man in his 40s who had covered countless stories, but the scene before him clearly affected him. "Sarah, what's going on here?" Sarah quickly explained the situation while the cameraman began recording. Harold sat on the curb, clutching the wooden box that had held his medals. "Mr. Chen," David said, approaching carefully. "I'm David Martinez from Channel 8 News. Would you be willing to tell me about your service?" Harold looked up with eyes that had seen too much. "What's the point? Nobody cares about old soldiers." "I care," David said. "And I think a lot of other people will too. What happened in Korea?" Harold was quiet for a long moment, staring at the silver star in his hands. Finally, he spoke. "It was December 1950, Chosin Reservoir. Chinese forces had surrounded our position. We were outnumbered 10 to 1, maybe more. The temperature was 40 below zero." As Harold spoke, his voice grew stronger, the memories bringing back echoes of the young soldier he had once been. "My unit was pinned down. The Chinese were advancing, and we were running out of ammunition. I volunteered to take a message to another unit to coordinate a counterattack. It meant crossing 2 miles of open ground, alone, in the middle of a firefight." The small crowd had grown larger, drawn by the news van and the extraordinary story unfolding on the sidewalk. I made it to the other unit, but on the way back, I found a group of wounded Marines who had been left behind. 7 men, all badly hurt. The Chinese were closing in. Harold's hands had stopped shaking as he spoke. The frail old man seemed to straighten, carrying himself with the dignity of a soldier. I couldn't leave them. I went back for each one at a time. 7 trips across that killing field. The last man I carried was unconscious, a bullet in his chest. We barely made it to our lines before the Chinese overran the position. David glanced at his cameraman, who nodded. They were getting all of this. How many lives did you save, Mr. Chen? 7. 7 Marines who went home to their families because I couldn't leave them behind. Harold's voice was barely a whisper. The army said I was a hero, gave me this medal. But I was just doing what any soldier would do. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Harold, that's incredible. Why didn't you ever talk about this? Harold shrugged. Who would listen? My Eleanor knew, but she's gone. I don't have any family left. The other men from my unit, they're all gone too. Margaret had emerged from the building again, this time with a security guard. She looked annoyed at the growing crowd and the news crew. This is private property, she announced. You all need to leave, including Mr. Chen. David stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm David Martinez from Channel 8 News. Can you comment on your decision to evict this decorated war veteran? Margaret's face flushed. This is not a news story. This is a private business matter. Mr. Chen hasn't paid his rent in 3 months. How much does he owe? Asked a voice from the crowd. It was Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired physician who lived in the neighborhood. That's confidential, Margaret replied. I owe $4,200, Harold said quietly. I've been here for 3 years, never missed a payment until Eleanor got sick. Dr. Williams pulled out her phone. I'm making some calls. As she stepped away, speaking quietly, Sarah noticed that Harold was looking at one of the scattered photographs with particular intensity. Who's that? She asked. Harold held up a faded color photograph showing him in his army uniform standing next to a young Korean girl, maybe 8 years old. Behind them was a village scene with traditional Korean houses. Her name was Sujin. This was taken in the village we saved. After the battle at Chosin, we were stationed there for a few weeks. The villagers, they had nothing. The war had taken everything. Harold's voice grew soft with memory. I shared my rations with her. She was so thin, so hungry. Her parents had been killed in the fighting. She was living with her grandmother. What happened to her? I don't know. When we shipped out, I promised I'd come back to visit. But I never did. I went home, married Eleanor, got a job at the post office. Life happened. I always wondered what became of her. Dr. Williams returned, her face grim. I just spoke with 3 different organizations, the Veterans Administration, the Korean War Veterans Association, and the local VFW. They're all willing to help, but it's going to take time to process paperwork. Margaret checked her watch. It's 11:30. Mr. Chen has 30 minutes. The crowd was growing restless. Someone had shared David's Facebook Live broadcast, and more people were arriving. Cars had begun to slow down as they passed, their occupants staring at the unusual scene. This is bullshit, said a man in a construction vest. I'm a Vietnam vet, and this is how we treat our heroes? What can we do? Asked Mrs. Rodriguez. He needs $4,000. I've got 100 I can spare, Tom the mailman said, pulling out his wallet. I'll match that, said Dr. Williams. More people began reaching for their wallets, but Harold shook his head. No, please, I can't take charity. I've never taken charity in my life. It's not charity, Sarah said firmly. It's Americans taking care of an American hero. David's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then at his cameraman. We need to go live, right now. What's happening? Sarah asked. The story's gone viral. We've got calls from CNN, Fox News, and 3 other networks. Everyone wants to know about Harold Chen. As David prepared for the live broadcast, Margaret grew increasingly agitated. This is ridiculous. I'm running a business here, not a charity. Mr. Chen, you have 15 minutes. Harold stood up slowly, his dignity intact despite the circumstances. I understand, ma'am. You have a job to do. He began placing his belongings back in the cardboard box, handling each item with care. The crowd watched in respectful silence as he packed away his life. "Mr. Chen," David said, "we're about to go live on the air. Thousands of people are watching. Is there anything you'd like to say?" Harold looked at the camera, then at the crowd of neighbors and strangers who had gathered to witness his humiliation. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet strength of a man who had faced down death and emerged victorious. "I want people to know that I'm not bitter. I've had a good life. I served my country. I married a wonderful woman, and I've been blessed in many ways. Sometimes life throws you curveballs, and you just have to deal with them." He paused, looking at the silver star in his hands. "I'd like people to remember that there are a lot of veterans out there who are struggling. Not just old guys like me, but young men and women who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. They need our support too." David nodded to his cameraman, and they went live. Within minutes, the comments section of the Facebook broadcast was flooded with messages of support and outrage. "We're getting donations," David said, looking at his phone. "Hundreds of people are sending money." But Harold was already walking away, carrying his cardboard box and his dignity. He moved slowly down the sidewalk, unsure of where he was going, but determined to face whatever came next. "Harold, wait," Sarah called after him. He turned back, his eyes tired but peaceful. "I need to find somewhere to stay tonight. Maybe the homeless shelter has space." "You're not going to any shelter," said a voice from the crowd. It was Dr. Williams. "You're staying with me until we figure this out." Harold's eyes filled with tears. "I can't impose." "You're not imposing. You're a guest. And tomorrow, we're going to figure out how to get you back in that nursing home where you belong." As Harold walked back toward the crowd, David's phone rang. He answered it, his expression growing more amazed with each word. "Harold," he called out, "you need to hear this." Harold stopped, surrounded by his new community of supporters. That was the Korean consulate. They've been watching the broadcast. They want to know if you're the Harold Chen who saved the village of Songdo, Ri in 1950. Harold's face went pale. "How do they know about that?" "Because," David said, his voice filled with wonder, "Sue Jin is alive. She's been looking for you for 70 years. The crowd fell silent. Harold staggered slightly, and Dr. Williams caught his arm. "She's alive?" Harold whispered. "She's now Dr. Sue Jin Park, a retired professor of history at Seoul National University. She's written 3 books about the Korean War, and she's been trying to find the American soldier who saved her village and shared his food with a hungry little girl." Harold sank onto a nearby bench, overwhelmed. "She remembers me?" David sat beside him. "She remembers everything. She said you gave her a chocolate bar and told her that everything would be okay. She said you were the kindest man she'd ever met." "I just shared my food," Harold said. "It wasn't anything special." "It was everything to her." David replied, "She credits you with saving not just her life, but her spirit. She became a teacher because of you. She's helped thousands of students over the years." Margaret, who had been watching from the doorway of Sunset Manor, approached the group. Her expression had changed from annoyance to something approaching shame. "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, "I think we may have been hasty. Perhaps we can work out a payment plan." Harold looked up at her, his eyes clear and forgiving. "Thank you, ma'am. That's very kind." Dr. Williams stepped forward. "Actually, Margaret, I think Harold's going to have other options soon." She was right. By evening, Harold's story had been shared millions of times across social media. Donations poured in from across the country and around the world. The Korean War Veterans Association announced they were establishing a scholarship fund in his name. Dr. Soo Jin Park had booked a flight to America to meet the man who had shaped her entire life. But perhaps most importantly, Harold's story had reminded people of the countless veterans who served with honor and were struggling in silence. 3 days later, Harold sat in the lobby of Sunset Manor, now paid up for the next 5 years. The walls were decorated with new photographs, pictures of him receiving awards from veteran organizations, meeting with the mayor, and embracing Dr. Park when she arrived from Korea. "Mr. Chen," said Margaret, approaching with a cup of coffee, "your guest is here." David Martinez walked in, carrying a thick folder. "Harold, I have some news. Remember when you said you wondered what happened to the other men from your unit?" Harold nodded. I tried to find them over the years, but I never had much luck. Well, your story has changed that. We've been contacted by families of 4 of the Marines you saved. They want to meet you. Their children and grandchildren want to thank you personally. Harold's hands trembled as he reached for the folder. Inside were letters, photographs, and documents tracing the lives of the men he had carried to safety 70 years ago. This one became a teacher, David said, pointing to a photograph. This one was a police officer for 30 years. This one started a construction company and employed hundreds of people. This one became a minister. Harold studied each photograph, seeing young faces he remembered, now aged by time, but alive because of choices he had made in a frozen wasteland half a world away. They all lived full lives, Harold said softly. They had families, careers, made differences in the world. Because of you, David said. 7 families exist because of what you did. Dozens of grandchildren, hundreds of great-grandchildren. You didn't just save 7 lives, Harold. You saved generations. Harold closed the folder and looked around the lobby of Sunset Manor. Other residents were gathered around, listening to his story with rapt attention. These were his peers, men and women who had lived through the Depression, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and all the decades since. You know what the strangest part is? Harold said. I spent 70 years thinking I was forgotten, that what I did didn't matter, that nobody cared about old soldiers. He gestured toward the wall of photographs and letters. But I was never forgotten. Dr. Park remembered. Those Marines remembered. Their families remembered. And now, people I've never met are remembering too. Sarah Martinez, who had been the first to recognize the significance of the Silver Star, approached with her own news. Harold, I just got off the phone with the Veterans Administration. They've expedited your case. All your benefits are being restored, and they're issuing back payments for the delays. Harold smiled. That's wonderful news. But you know what? Even if none of this had happened, even if I had ended up in a homeless shelter, it would have been okay. How can you say that? Sarah asked. Because, Harold said, I learned something important. I learned that the measure of a life isn't whether you're remembered or forgotten. It's whether you did the right thing when it mattered. And I did. We all did. That evening, as Harold sat in his room at Sunset Manor, he opened a new letter that had arrived that day. It was from a young Marine serving in Afghanistan. Dear Mr. Chen, it read, I heard your story, and I wanted you to know that it's given me strength. I'm facing some tough times over here, and sometimes I wonder if what we're doing matters. Your story reminds me that it does. That individual acts of courage and kindness can echo through generations. Thank you for showing me what it means to be a soldier. Harold folded the letter carefully and placed it in his wooden box next to his silver star. Tomorrow, Dr. Park would arrive for their reunion. Tomorrow, the families of the Marines he had saved would begin arriving for a ceremony in his honor. Tomorrow, his story would continue to inspire others. But tonight, Harold Chen, forgotten hero no more, simply smiled and remembered a hungry little girl in a war-torn village, and the moment when sharing a chocolate bar had changed both their lives forever.